So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. And I'm just going to start. The consonance of life and myth is masterfully represented in the film I Know Where I'm Going from 1945. As the ironic title declares, a young woman who believes she knows what she wants undergoes a deep transformation that will change the course of her life. Her self-confidence is put to the test when she travels from the interior of England to a maritime region in Scotland in order to marry her wealthy boss. The spirit of the coast imposes a change in plans. A storm interrupts her journey and obliges her to take refuge on an island in the Hebrides. Here she comes into contact with the local traditions. They reflect a philosophy opposite of her own, which nevertheless attracts her more and more. A whirlwind of conflicting feelings takes hold of her as, little by little, she falls in love with an impoverished young aristocrat. The film is nominally a work of fiction, but halfway between dream and reality, it is also an ethnographic documentary that reflects the life of the inhabitants of the island. It is, above all, a quest narrative in which the hero must face different tests to achieve her goal. In fact, it represents an anti-quest, or the inverse of a masculine journey, since the heroine travels to reunite with her fiancé, but ends up rejecting him. In the process, she discovers herself and a new understanding of love. The young protagonist's voyage of self-knowledge is built on several narrative elements: the transfer from a familiar environment to a new territory, the figure of the guide, temptation, crisis, descent into the underworld, ascent, resurrection, and the final gift. In effect, the narrative closely resembles a fairy tale in which a young girl becomes an adult who knows what she wants. The characters are original, not simple archetypes, but their names are mostly allegorical. More than simply describing the people, they seem to predict their future. The protagonist, Joan Webster, whose name points to heroine, but also to weaver, is a hard-working, brave girl. Nevertheless, her main goal is achieving wealth and luxury. Her fiancé, the head of a chemical company and one of the richest men in England, has profited from shady business deals during the Second World War. His name, Robert Bellinger, suggests a belligerent conqueror. Once in Scotland, Joan meets Torquil MacNeil, a young naval officer who will be her guide. The name Torquil, derived from Thor, the god of thunder, and Kel, a sacrificial cauldron, foreshadows the storm in which the protagonists will be trapped. His surname, MacNeil, designates an ancient Scottish clan. Torquil advises that Joan stay in a house belonging to Catriona MacLean, a strong and clairvoyant woman. Significantly, she bears the same name as an ancestor who was murdered by her husband after he surprised her with her lover. The third most ancient and powerful clan of the Scottish Highlands is represented in the figure of John Campbell, whose elderly parents are celebrating their diamond wedding anniversary. The couple is related to the aristocratic owner of Acnacroish, which suggests anachronistic and means field of the cross. And the examples don't end here. So I wrote 65 pages in Spanish, and this is just 10, so just a brief summary. A sense of double temporality impregnates the film, not only because of the confluence of historical and mythic events, but also because of the synchronism of past and present. Many of the sequences use images that merge the real with the fantastic. Two particularly original examples of this are when the station master's top hat is transformed into the chimney of a train, or when the Scottish hills appear to be wrapped in tartans. The film, which was made in 1944, had its premiere several months after the end of the Second World War, which is pervasive but scarcely perceptible. The bridge between past and present is constructed by a series of ballads that allude to another war, the Jacobite Rebellion, that took place exactly 200 years earlier. That conflict left such a mark on the island's inhabitants that, like a ghostly presence, seems to affect them even more than the contemporaneous World War. One of the most moving songs about that brutal confrontation, the bonny banks of Loch Lomond, plays in the background like a welcome when Joan arrives in Scotland. The islanders' identity links their present to a mythic past. The festival of Cayley, which leads Joan into the ethnographic heart of the community, transmits happiness but also a profound sense of nostalgia. One of the songs performed in honor of the elderly couple is The Campbells Are Coming. Inspired by the Jacobite Rebellion, it alludes to an episode that affected the Scottish consciousness in general and the Campbells in particular, the imprisonment of Mary, Queen of Scots, in the Loch Leven castle. Another son, it has been said that this is a musical film in a way. Another son, The Nut Brown Maid, centers on the love affair between a man and a woman. The son allows Tausiet to reveal his feelings for Joan indirectly. Just before the ending, it is heard again, this time performed by the 3 bagpipers hired for Joan's wedding, who never managed to play. As a counterpoint, the traditional ballad I Know Where I Am Going, which lends its title to the film, sounds at the very end. It is the same sound we hear at the beginning, but given Joan's transformation, its meaning is now completely different. And we can listen to it. The opening credits give us some indication of the protagonist's changes. The little Joan, who first appears crawling at foot speed, metamorphoses into a materialistic child of 5 who writes a letter to Santa Claus asking for a stocking made of real stockings, not nylon. Next, she is seen at 12 with her first pair of stockings. At 18, the young woman prefers to eat at the best restaurant in Manchester, and at 25, she is already accustomed to a life of luxury. But the real evolution doesn't begin until she moves to the Hebrides. This transformation is expressed above all through her dreams and her direct contact with the forces of nature. The director's love of surrealism is evident in the dream Joan has in a sleeping car during her journey. In this dream, which we will see in a minute, her own father leads a ceremony in which she is married not to a man, but rather to a factory, Consolidated Chemical Industries. Meanwhile, her white satin wedding dress shines remarkably, matching the sparkle of her engagement ring. As soon as she becomes the rich and glamorous Mrs. Bellinger, her short hair is transformed into the long blonde mane of Hollywood actresses. And instead of rice, pound notes flutter in the air. So let's see it.
We'll send it then.
500 guineas, 500 guineas.
To you, madame. Thank you, madame.
Ladies, very just card.
You take the high road and I'll take the low road and I'll be in Scotland before me. Next station, Gretna Green. You're over the border now.
Glasgow Central!
Oh! Yes?
Okay. Oh no, sorry. Here. A violent storm will thwart Joan's dream of a life of riches. Once in Scotland, she says a prayer asking for the wind to clear away the fog that is keeping her from her destination. The power of nocturnal dreams is a half-Christian, half-pagan belief. Tausiet has assured Joan that when one sleeps in a house for the first time, one's dreams will become reality if one counts the beams of the bedroom. She sleeps in a room with a circular roof and after counting the beams, recites a brief prayer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, please, Lord, don't let the wind drop and let it blow the fog away. One of the hidden keys to the film is the prominence of the number 5. As we have seen, the opening credits summarize the protagonist's development in 5 fundamental phases. And although her subsequent evolution is much more detailed, it also follows the same pattern, since it takes place over 5 days and 5 nights. In this sense, Tausiet's suggestion that Joan count the 5 beams might be understood as an invitation to count herself, according to the stages she is passing through. Joan's calculating prayer will not achieve the desired effect. The following morning, the strong wind has dissipated the fog, but now it has stirred up a dangerous storm. Even so, Joan tries to get to the island as soon as possible. From this point on, the power of nature will impose itself with full force. The furious waters, and in particular the whirlpool, in which she almost drowns, bring about a cathartic initiation. Just as in Shakespeare's famous play, The Tempest, the sea spits out whoever enters into it completely changed. The whirlpool sequence is the symbolic center of the film. In it, Joan comes out of the abyss and faces the consequences of her hubris. Thanks to Tausiet, she will be saved, but realizing that she has put herself and her 2 companions in mortal danger, she returns to dry land a new person. In the midst of the heavy seas, her idolized wedding dress has fallen into the water and been swept away by the hurricane. With it, the last vestiges of her materialism disappear. And I quote, "Wonder what happened to my wedding dress," she tells Tausiet the day after, and he replies, "A mermaid will marry in it." Behind its simplicity, the film resists classification. The initial mocking tone gives way to a gentler fairy tale mood when Joan arrives in Scotland. And despite the apparent idealization of rural life, it is not a nostalgic movie. On the one hand, the island of Mull, with its majestic landscape, the solidarity of its people, and the beauty of its dances, is a pastoral refuge. But on the other hand, there are hints of lingering ancient and bloody acts of vengeance. The law of Talion, so fundamental to many fairy tales, breathes beneath the plot. The link between life and myth constitutes the core of the film. An invisible thread connects reality with fiction and runs through the character's psychology. In particular, the feelings of the protagonists are affected by a series of ancestral memories reflected in 2 legends. One, medieval in origin, tells the story of a shipwreck caused by a reckless prince. The second, conceived by the directors on the basis of traditional folklore motifs, is a bloody tale of vengeance that unleashes a curse ante mortem. The first legend is situated in the whirlpool of Corribreckan. The name is associated with a tale about a prince called Breckan who perished in a shipwreck along with all his crew. The day after they meet, Joan and Tausiet go to the radio station in Tobermory when Joan asks about a picture that has attracted her attention. and says, "The legend of Corryvreckan," and he replies, "It is the second biggest whirlpool in Europe. It lies northeast of Killoran. Corry means cauldron or whirlpool. Breckan was a prince of Norway. He sought the daughter of the Lord of the Isles to marry her. The Lord of the Isles refused to give away his daughter, except on one condition. Prince Breckan must anchor his galley in Corryvreckan for 3 days and nights. He went straight back to Norway. There he asked the advice of the old men. They told him to take 3 anchor ropes, one of hemp, one of flax, and the third rope was made of the hair of maidens who are faithful to their lovers. The maidens gave their tresses, and Prince Breckan sailed for the Hebrides. The first night the hemp rope broke. The second night the flax rope broke. But the third rope held fast. The third night. The narration is interrupted here, but when Joan is in the boat at the edge of the whirlpool, she asks Torquil to resume the story that he left off 2 days earlier. "You never finished the story about the Norwegian prince. What happened to the third rope made from the hair of faithful maidens? It held until the tide turned, but one maiden was untrue to her lover, only one, and when that strand broke, the whole rope broke with it." The story of the shipwreck of the Norwegian prince exists in several different versions. According to one variant, the women have a greater role and more power. For example, the condition for marriage is imposed by the maiden, not by her father. Likewise, the advice to use 3 ropes to anchor the boat comes not from wise men, but from an ancient witch. The rope materials vary from hemp or horsehair for the first rope, and linen, wool, or sealskin for the second, but all versions agree in that the third rope is woven from the hair of innocent, pure young women, or in some cases virgins. With roots in ancient beliefs in the magical power of virginity, the traditional variants allude to the virtue of the maidens, rather than to the women's loyalty to their lovers, which appears in the script from an implicitly sexist perspective. Be that as it may, as in many other traditional and present-day myths, hair is an essential symbol. It represents vital energy and is often related to inspiration. The hair of the head has been compared to a kind of personal aura that embodies the most intimate thoughts of an individual. The power of a virgin's hair constitutes an important motif in many fairy tales, such as Rapunzel. In this story, the maiden's locks are like an umbilical cord tying her to her hyperprotective mother, which must be cut in order for the girl to become independent and find her own path. The legend of the Prince of Corryvreckan, which presents an evolution from the most fragile to the most solid, also evokes folk tales such as the 3 Little Pigs, in which the animals make successively stronger huts, the first of straw, the second of wood, and the third of bricks. The story exemplifies how extra effort can yield great reward. Nevertheless, unlike the happy ending that awaits the 3 Pig brothers, the story of Prince Breckan thwarts expectations, since the third rope, which should be stronger, breaks, triggering the calamity. In a way, the faithful legend of the whirlpool pushes Joan to understand her own striving and what is important to her. In fantasy, as in reality, love intervenes and determines the final outcome. In the story of the Scandinavian prince, the disloyalty of a single woman is sufficient reason to bring about the misfortune of 50 men. The lack of love in the legend contrasts with the dedication of Torquil, who throws himself into the raging sea to save Joan. Torquil ends his story about the tragedy of the prince by adding a personal commentary. Nothing is stronger than true love. Tradition determines the character of the islanders. In spite of his cheerful disposition, Torquil lives under the weight of a evil spell, cast upon the men of his family centuries earlier. This terrible prophecy, resulting from frustrated love, constitutes the second legendary building block in the narrative. Although it is mentioned twice in the film, the enigma of the curse is not revealed until the end, when a woman's voice, seductive and melodious like a fairy's, is heard off camera. It is the voice of Torquil's old nurse who tells the prophecy related to the castle, and I am going to summarize because of the lack of time. Once upon a time, MacNeil of Killoran took a beautiful wife, but she was in love with a cousin of hers, a MacLean. After a year and a day, when her husband was away, she escaped from Killoran and took refuge with her lover. One black night, Killoran came. He besieged and took the castle and killed every soul except the two lovers. There is a deep dungeon just off the hall. It is a well just big enough for a man to stand on or drown. Killoran tricked the two lovers, chained them together, and threw them into the dungeon. He sat in the great hall, feasted and mocked them, until they dragged one another down. Before she died, the woman cursed Killoran and every future MacNeil of Killoran, if they should ever cross the threshold of the castle. It is a terrible, strong curse. It goes, "This is the curse of Catriona MacLean of Erraig, my curse on MacNeil of Killoran and every MacNeil after him. If he shall ever cross the threshold of Moy, never shall he leave it a free man. He shall be chained to a woman to the end of his days." Although this is not a romantic film in the usual sense, love permeates it from beginning to end, not only in the protagonist's vicissitudes, but also in the strong bonds that unite other couples. The youngsters, ta-ta-ta, and the elderly, ta-ta-ta, I'm summarizing, provide an exemplary background for the lovers' trials and contribute to the success of their union. 3 days after John's arrival in Scotland, the Campbells celebrate their 60th wedding anniversary. In the middle of the party, the couple's son rises and exclaims euphorically, "Friends and neighbors, 100,000 blessings on my parents. They are 61 years, married this day. Peace and happiness be with them, the pride of the great Clan Campbell." The number 61, which adds a day to the usual anniversary, invokes the symbolism of a year and a day associated in folk literature with the period within which heroes must complete their quest. At the end of the 18th century, the idea of a chivalric trial period lasting a year and a day became associated with the belief that in Scotland, since the Middle Ages, there had existed an equivalent trial marriage period of a year and a day. And I summarize. The script writers wink ironically at this kind of mythologizing. According to the legend of the Cars, the Lord of Killoran looked for a wife on the mainland. When a year and a day had passed, the woman fled Killoran and was reunited with the man she loved. One dark night, the husband raised the castle before torturing and assassinating the lovers. In this mythic context, the wife's flight would have marked an end to the trial period for the couple, freeing her from her matrimonial vow after the customary period, as well as from any blame associated with adultery. The fictional story of heartbreak stands in contrast to the real love story between the elderly Campbells, who are celebrating not 60 but 61 years of marriage. This extra day represents the quality of their loving promise, one so prolonged that it requires a number expressing what has no end. The sentence, "forever and a day," is characteristic of fairy tales. In the 1001 Nights, for example, the number refers not to a concrete figure, but to innumerable, infinite nights. And I'm finishing now. The importance of time, past and future, but above all, the importance of waiting, is underscored through the film. The Campbells' marriage constitutes a vivid image of a long-lasting love. The youngsters look forward to their wedding day, but without impatience, something John is not capable of understanding. The curse of the castle projects the threat of a perpetual punishment. Nevertheless, the directors, with their characteristic sense of humor, transform the fateful prophecy into hope of a common future for the lovers. It is, without doubt, an optimistic ending that confirms the triumph of true love over pragmatism. But it doesn't mean that everything has been resolved. Joan's journey to a world opposite her own has just begun, and she has much to learn. Perhaps the only really important thing for someone like her, incapable of slowing down, is to trust that, as Henry Longfellow affirmed, all things come round to him who will but wait. Thank you very much.
So with the panels, we'll do the speakers and then we'll do questions at the end as a group thing. Is that all right? So Fern, I'll give myself a head rush. Would you like to come up? Oh, I'll get your thing up. So this is Fern, Ennis, The White Ladies of Whitby, Coastal Legends, and Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'm just finding that.
I've got a flash drive.
Oh, great.
Is that okay?
No, it's fine. Thank you. It might mean that you can't use the clicker.
Okay, that's okay. I can use the keyboard.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
No, that's all right.
Oh, is that? What have you
Did you email it? No, you didn't
I
email.
didn't.
No, that's
no,
fine.
sorry.
No, that's fine. All right. So we'll go from here.
Okay.
So if you use those arrows, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay.
When we first meet Lucy Westenra in Dracula, she is a bride-to-be on holiday at Whitby, sweetly pretty in her white lawn frock and flushed with a beautiful colour from the sea air. In her final appearance of the novel, she is a vampire laid out in her tomb on Hampstead Hill, and her lips are flushed crimson with fresh blood that has also stained the purity of her lawn death robe. Her encounter with the supernatural at Whitby takes her from expectant domestic happiness to blighted vampiric death beauty, and this transformation has always been central to Dracula criticism. However, much of this criticism has read her vampirism in relation to social and scientific concerns of the late 19th century, particularly a shared social and scientific anxiety over women's sexual desires. It is only recently that Lucy's character has been read as a response to other female characters and archetypes that we might encounter in literature and in folklore. One instance of this is Catherine Wynne's Bram Stoker, Dracula and the Victorian Gothic stage, where Wynne reads Lucy's vampirism in connection to popular theatrical heroines whose victimhood or suffering generated sympathy from a 19th century audience. In Dracula, as Lucy lies dying from Count Dracula's bite, she is compared to Ophelia in the play, with wreaths of garlic hung around her neck. To Wynne, this very deliberate comparison from Stoker draws our attention to the subversive horror of his novel. While a performance of Ophelia by Ellen Terry at the Lyceum Theatre could be expected to transform sin, suffering and horror into something radiant and beautiful to her audience, Wynne argues that it is darkness that triumphs when Lucy's vampiric condition turns her innocent loveliness into sin and horror. In my presentation here today, I also want to read Lucy's character as part of a tradition of tragic heroines, and to think about what conceptions of victimhood and life in darkness are called on in Lucy's narrative as a result of this tradition. However, today I will draw attention to how Stoker associates Lucy with the folklore and literary history of the coastal town of Whitby, a space in Dracula where we see the sea and sky merged together in one great silent mystery that also encompasses a number of potential correspondences for Lucy as a character. So, when Lucy's friend Mina arrives at Whitby, Lucy is there to meet her, and so is all the romance of the coast. Lucy met me at the station, looking sweeter and lovelier than ever, Mina writes in her diary, and we drove up to the house at the Crescent. This is a lovely place. Right over the town is the ruin of Whitby Abbey, which was sacked by the Danes, and which is a scene of part of Marmion, where the girl was built up in the wall. It is a most noble ruin of immense size and full of beautiful and romantic bits. There is a legend that a white lady is seen in one of the windows. Mina does not see this legendary white lady in the window of the abbey, but when Lucy sleepwalks from their room at the Crescent to a churchyard over the harbour, Mina instead sees her friend stretched down a grave in her nightgown, a half-reclining figure, snowy white. The night Lucy sleepwalks to the churchyard is the night that she becomes a victim of Count Dracula, an experience which she describes as sinking into deep green water, an act of drowning. After several months of illness, she dies and is resurrected as a vampiric nightmare of Lucy that is hunted down to her crypt on Hampstead Hill and finally staked and decapitated by her doctor and 3 of her former suitors. Introduced to readers as a creature of shadow and shade, Count Dracula himself has no natural association with the kind of seaside scene which he dismisses as the bright voluptuousness of much sunshine and sparkling waters which please the young and gay. However, coastal scenes are reflective of Lucy at either side of her vampiric transformation. There is the deep green water of the vampiric trance she falls under of Whitby, and there is also the oceans of love and millions of kisses which she writes to send in her letters to Mina, letters which are animated by a sparkling affection that has the same quality of bright voluptuousness that is distanced from other vampires in Dracula. The darkness and light that is alluded to in the changeable nature of water and the transformed presence of Lucy is also reflected in the aspects of coastal folklore and literature, which Stoker uses to introduce the location of Whitby in the novel. Mina's diary references both the White Lady who is said to haunt Whitby Abbey and the girl who was built up in the wall in the Walter Scott poem Marmion. The White Lady is St. Hilda, the foundress of Whitby Abbey. The girl built up in the wall in Marmion is Constance de Beverley, a nun who is seduced and abandoned by Lord Marmion and sentenced to death by immurement as punishment for escaping her convent. Here I would like to read the figures of St. Hilda and Constance de Beverley in connection to the narrative of Dracula and consider how their presence in the novel complements its presentation of Lucy as both victim and vampire. The folklore history of St. Hilda had been featured in fin de siècle literature before the publication of Dracula. One instance of this is a poetry collection from H.G. Rawnsley, Sonnets Round the Coast, which features 24 sonnets about Whitby. These sonnets are based around many of the folk tales and locations which are visited and reconstructed through the character of Lucy Westenra. In the sonnet St. Hilda, it is said that Hilda is so pure of heart and pure of hand that she can turn snakes to stone. Still is the power of pure-souled maids who pray, the sonnet concludes, strong to destroy all venomous things that crawl. In the sonnet St. Hilda's Lights, her folkloric appearances at the windows of the abbey are explored. In that old church, which is the harbour's crown, 3 windows brighten wondrously. Men say, it is St. Hilda, come with saints' array, slid out of heaven to be a moment known. To be a white lady in Sonnets Round the Coast is to be a bright presence in the coastal landscape of Whitby, and Hilda's appearances here are a radiant affirmation of her spiritual purity. However, the radiance of St. Hilda is still presented within the sonnet sequence as a narrative of maidenhood in darkness. Ronzi's first Whitby sonnet is titled The Sorrow of the Sea and focuses and looks on the restless ebb and flow of the coast beneath the abbey as the explanation of a ceaseless woe that cannot swoon. To walk the headlands of Whitby in the sonnet is to spell over the scripture of the sea and to learn how hearts inconsolable endure. As enduring as the adamantine body of the vampire in Dracula, and responsive to the sorrowing moon, the flowering foam reefs of Worsley's coast in The Sorrow of the Sea are not entirely dissimilar to the symptoms of vampirism which manifest in Lucy Westenra, who dies with her lips smeared with a crimson foam when she is staked in her tomb by her fiancé Arthur Holmwood. Seen as a dim white figure in the aching void of Hampstead after dark, Lucy keeps the luminescence of St. Hilda, even when she is, to the eyes of the men who will eventually kill her, unclean and full of hellfire. Stoker introduces the abbey not only as the noble ruin of St. Hilda, but also as the scene of part of Marmion, where the girl was built up in the wall. This is a reference to the poem Marmion by Sir Walter Scott, but it's not a wholly accurate reference. In Marmion, Constance de Beverley is bricked up alive into a living tomb at Lindisfarne, after she's abandoned by Lord Marmion for the wealthy and beautiful Clara de Clare. When Marmion schemes to marry Clara, however, Clara takes the veil at Whitby. As Scott puts it, a pure heart, a lovelier maid, ne'er sheltered her in Whitby's shade. There's no such effective protection for Lucy in Dracula, and so the displaced reference to the punishment of Constance de Beverley transforms Whitby from a scene of shelter and sanctity into a scene of tragedy that has critical implications for how Lucy's own transformation can be read within the novel. Lord Marmion of Marmion is introduced as a stalwart knight and keen, and his eye of fire anticipates the red eyes of Count Dracula himself. Like the sleepwalking Lucy, Constance is lovely when, at treacherous call, she left her convent's peaceful wall. However, the strongest comparisons between Marmion and Dracula occur when we read the immurement of Constance in Lindisfarne, next to the second death of Lucy in her crypt on Hampstead Hill. In Marmion, Constance is tried and buried alive in a darksome tower, where a cresset in an iron chain with damp and darkness seem to strive. She faces a jury of servants of St. Benedict, one of whom is the Abbess of Whitby. In other words, she is punished by the same forces that protect other women within the poem. Yet while she is numbered with the dead for broken vows and convent fled, and condemned by other characters within the poem because no more of virgin terror speaks the blood that mantles in her cheeks, this did not preclude Constance from being recognised as a tragic heroine in 19th century literary culture. The Athenaeum praised an 1830s revision of Marmion for bringing the lady nearer our affections and for exciting a deeper sympathy in her fate. To reviewers in the Belfast Monthly magazine, the sympathy for her sufferings that they felt after reading of her despair made her equal to a fallen archangel, majestic though in ruins. It is in this context, then, that Dracula reveals Lucy in her tomb. In Hampstead, we see Lucy literally encrypted in a mausoleum that is wreathed with dying flowers, their whites turning to rust and their greens to browns. As a victim of Count Dracula, she has been buried alive in a space of time-discoloured stone and dust-encrusted mortar, and rusty, dank iron, and tarnished brass, and clouded silver plating. This burial is followed, rather than preceded, by a trial which also looks back to the trial scenes of Marmion. Famously, Lucy is condemned to a second death by those who loved her in life because, as a vampire, her former sweetness has turned to adamantine heartless cruelty and voluptuous wantonness. These are the same fierce qualities that lead Constance de Beverley to her burial. As a vampire, Lucy is delivered to the true dead by her fiancé and a mercy-bearing stake. Yet these echoes of Marmion invite readers of Dracula to perhaps fulfill the words of Constance de Beverley within the poem, who tells her jurors that one day her vault will be opened again to the sea wind's sweep, and someone will look on her remains with pity. In the living tomb of Lindisfarne, Constance can hear a distant rill of the ocean's swells and falls through the stones of the walls. The intertextuality of Dracula creates a similar effect in the story of Lucy Westenra. Rather than keep Lucy sealed up in her crypt, her connections to the literature and folklore of Whitby allow us to open her story out to the sea wind's sweep and consider how this tradition of white ladies calls up a history of maidenhood and victimhood that turns the horror of immortality and burial back to a fantasy of tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Did you get it? Do you want me to eject
Yes.
it? You did it. Well done. All right, so next we got, I didn't check how to pronounce your name, sorry. Olle Jilkén and Lina Johansson. Is that nearly right? And yours is Aquatic, Heterosexual Love and Wondrous, Cliché Stereotypes, Amphibian Masculinity and the Beast Bridegroom motif in the Shape of Water. So I'll put that up there.
Yes. Shape of Water. How many of you have watched this film? Good. Okay. Some common ground.
And then if you want left.
Um,
Yeah, so it goes that way. And then there is a laser.
Okay, I can start by introducing myself. My name is Olle, as we heard, and we are both from Stockholm, Sweden, and I have a master's in gender studies and a Bachelor in Arts Management. And now I work at Stockholm University Student Union full-time. Yeah.
Yeah, and my name is Lina, and I have a bachelor degree in Japanese studies, a one-year master in gender studies, and a master in translation studies. And I'm currently working as an assistant teacher at the Department of Asian, Middle East, and Turkey Studies at Stockholm University. So today we're going to talk about the representation of amphibious creature, amphibian man, from the romantic fantasy film The Shape of Water. Our analysis is divided into 3 parts. The first compares the amphibian man to similar creatures in modern media lore. The second examines the beast rider motif in The Shape of Water. And the last studies how otherness is portrayed in the film.
Do you want me to handle? No.
A mute cleaning lady and a fishman in a laboratory might not be the most traditional setting for a romantic film. But The Shape of Water is more than that. It's also an aquatic monster movie, set during the Cold War era. The mix of traditionally feminine and masculine genres might be what led to the film's huge success. The Shape of Water has been celebrated not only for its production design, directing, musical score, acting, and screenplay, but also for its political message of embracing a more empathic ideology in a world of cynicism. This is what one critic said. It's a film that acknowledges marginalized minorities and outsiders and regards conservative masculinity authority with a jaundiced eye. And later he also says it's a very literal fuck you to the man. These claims makes the movie particularly interesting for us as gender studies theorists to analyze. So before we get into masculinities in The Shape of Water, we will talk about the phenomenon of amphibious fishmen in films.
Yes. When it comes to amphibious monster men, we have 3 of them here. The theme of myth and folklore are often mixed with science. The fishmen often can originate from laboratories, like the fishman in the middle, the amphibian man, from Alexander Belyaev's novel from 1928. Other times they are referred to as long-living mythical creatures from the world before modern time, like the creature from the Black Lagoon. And but these creatures are often kept in captivity in laboratories later on in media lore. So, yeah. This is also the case for amphibian man in The Shape of Water. And another similarity with the creature from the Black Lagoon and amphibian man is that they are connected to mythology concerning the Amazon River. In The Shape of Water, it is said that the natives in Amazon worshipped the amphibian man like a god. And even though Del Toro, the director, says that amphibian man is not based on any existing mythical creature, amphibian man still shares a lot of similarities with folkloric water spirits. So, and one example of this water spirits is the Yakurunas from Amazonian myth. The Yakurunas are water people living in underwater cities with healing powers, and because of their healing powers, they were summoned by the shamans to help. But they also have a more sinister side, as they are known for abducting humans by seducing and luring them into their underwater world. Amphibian Man proves in the movie that he got healing abilities, but he doesn't seem to have any sinister motives. But he still succeeds in seducing the main character, Eliza, down to his watery domains. And these qualities are not only connected to Jackarunas or amphibian man, but it's a common thing for several water spirits, as we heard before, actually. And maybe one of the most popular is the mermaid. So, it's time for the spoiler alert. The presence of mermaids is tangible in The Shape of Water as well. The first scene, for example, echoes of Disney's The Little Mermaid Princess, The Little Mermaid, as we get a glimpse of the main character and her dream world, where her apartment is set underwater, and this is accompanied by whimsical music. A voiceover introduces the audience to Eliza as the princess without a voice, which again hints to the famous mute Disney princess and mermaid Ariel. The storyline's thesis that Eliza might descend from merpeople is further implied, as she was found by the river as a baby. Moreover, she has scars on her neck, which you can see. Maybe you can't see because
The
it's...
most red thing.
Where her vocal cords are placed. This hints that her vocal cord has been removed. But in the end scene, these scars are turned into gills. Or maybe they were only activated by amphibian man. Maybe they were always gills. And she can start living her life under the surface, just as it was supposed to be. The pairing of fishmen and mermaids are not unusual. It's done in several texts in modern media lore. For example, here it's pictures from a TV series called Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, where amphibian fishman saves a mermaid from humans. And these characters are from a video game called Darkest Dungeon, where the player fights the siren, who has fishmen underlings, the pelagics. Why is fishmen paired with mermaids and not mermen? We have a theory, and that is the mermen have a more precarious position in culture. Mermen have a fishtail that is said to have a castrating effect, and it is also read as a feminizing component because of its curved forms and its colorful appearance and its way of looking like a dress that keeps the legs tight together, leaving no place for a penis. Fishes also have a certain feminine association. For example, the term fish is used in drag queen communities to describe someone, most often a drag queen, that passes as a good-looking cis woman. Note how amphibian man and other water-living male humanoids of his kind in contemporary media seems to be more related to amphibian and or reptilians than fish. The dark, thick scales of Gillman and his way of lurking in the canals of the Amazon River resembles an alligator, and amphibian man has a reptilian-like sound and dark crocodile green color on his scales. Moreover, both of them have legs and not fishtails, so the castrating effect of the merman's fishtail is successfully eliminated. Still, The Shape of Water stresses this concern even further. In one scene, Eliza demonstrates with hand gestures to her colleague that there is a penis hiding behind the scales on amphibian man. So there are no mistakes that amphibian man is truly a man. So now we established that amphibian man has a stable masculinity. Let's look into his more monstrous form and how he functions as a beast bridegroom motif.
Yes. Today we connect the beast bridegroom motif mostly to Disney's Beauty and the Beast. But the story of a woman being forced to marry a monster has existed for thousands of years, and in various versions. It mirrors the worries that comes with being married to an unknown man. It's possible to see some common themes in the versions from the same period of time. Like these old ones often tells women to be submissive, and by being submissive, the husband will not not be the monster he looks from the outside. And as always, studies have searched for the sexual message of the beast bridegroom stories. In earlier stories, the beast was a symbol for the sexuality that had to be tamed. And this was done by the wife and not upsetting her husband. And when this has finally succeeded, the monster is transformed into a beautiful human. This is the reward for being a good, submissive wife. As times changes, so does the message of the beast bridegroom motif. Nowadays, many women can choose their husbands, and monster is therefore not as frightening anymore. This change in the society is also portrayed by beauty getting a choice in whom to marry. Either she can choose the beast, or she can choose the handsome, strong, masculine man. Following masculinity terms, he is at the beginning of the movie portrayed as the hegemonic masculinity, which is the masculinity that is seen as the right and most attractive. Like Gaston here from Beauty and the Beast, he has always women following him around. In The Shape of Water, I would say it's Richard Strickland, because, yeah. However, as the story unfolds, he becomes more and more aggressive and frightening. And it's soon apparent that the beast is less of a monster than Gaston or Strickland. Therefore, the beast bridegroom's masculinity becomes the hegemonic masculinity. Not only is the beast respectful of women and sensitive, he is also hot. Something which is never seen in older beast bridegroom fairy tales. This is almost censored. So, as the historian Marina Warner puts it, the beast stirs desire. Beauty responds from some deep inner need which he awakens. The monster now becomes a symbol of the woman's sexuality, which has to be released in order for a man to love her. In The Shape of Water, Eliza controls her sexuality by masturbating in the bath. But when the amphibian man comes along, she stops masturbating and enjoys herself with him instead. And because the monster now has so many good qualities, he doesn't need to transform anymore to be a good catch. And this is true also for amphibian man. He doesn't transform even a bit. The characteristics of the new beast is in line with the stereotypical way to portray men in media and culture, which is called the new man. The name might be misleading because there is nothing new with him. While he might be emotionally aware and only uses violence when necessary, it's still a woman who needs to educate him. The English studies scholar Susan Jeffords argued that the reason for Disney's Beauty and the Beast success is that the message of the story is that we should not criticize men when they are harsh. Instead, we should show them love and kindness. Only then they will find the gentle side. Amphibian man does not even get a reprimand when he eats a cat. Thus, once again, we're told a story where nothing is the man's fault, and the woman should take responsibility for everything. Not so new in our opinion, but since the film has gotten much praise for the diverse characters, the portrayal of otherness might be better.
Yes, the film covers many different types of otherness, which also is explained to be one of the reasons the movie was a huge success. Eliza's closest co-worker, Zelda, is a talkative Afro-American woman that has taken Eliza under her wings at their work at the science facility, where they clean. You can see here. She's there. And then Eliza's nearest friend outside of work is the elderly gay neighbor, Giles, who is unemployed, involuntarily single, and troubled with his hair loss. Later, Eliza also finds an ally in the Russian immigrant, scientist and spy that goes under his undercover name Dr. Robert Hofstetler. Together with Eliza's muteness, these different representation of minority groups puts Amphibian Man into another level of otherness. This also gives Amphibian Man an alibi for not representing any of the marginalized human categories, something Gilman from the Black Lagoon did not have and therefore got accused for representing a troublesome racial stereotype of a dangerous black man due to his dark appearance and the title of the film. The association of aquatic beings and the racialized other has been made before, as aquatic entities are portrayed sometimes with facial features resembling people of color and are strongly connected to nature. But by using a black sidekick, The Shape of Water avoids this association to Amphibian Man. Still, his otherness lies nearer a racialized position than anything else. In a way, Amphibian Man's otherness is so extreme that it is hard to connect with him. He generally seems to function more as an animal than a human being. Likewise, Eliza's blind dedication to Amphibian Man and her quirky personality makes it difficult to identify with her. This brings us the question, who is the true narrator of The Shape of Water? Whom do you as audience see yourself in if the hero and the heroine are too distant, too other to identify with? Well, it's a white man, of course. This is Giles, Eliza's neighbor. Giles has the first and last lines of the movie and therefore is the one that tells the story of the princess without a voice. Giles embodies the voice of reason and the modern man with all its flaws. He is lazy, afraid of breaking the law, vain, and more concerned about entertainment in the form of old movies, rather than facing the world's hardships and inequalities. Giles is a good example of the political correct hero, who is less preoccupied by physical accomplishments and more invested in moral and intellectual growth. Still, he needs to evolve by becoming more brave, which Eliza and Amphibian Man teaches him, and by this he also climbs upwards on the ladder of masculinity. Giles is gay, but his queerness is made harmless, as it is never shown more than with some yearning glances towards a pie-selling waiter. This makes him approachable for audiences, even though his homosexuality that might not be okay with that.
So, in summary, The Shape of Water have a diverse list of characters, and the story stresses the worth of all lives. But the message is lost behind the traditional images of masculinity. None of the characters are breaking against any stereotypes that exist in modern media world. And the only character which undergoes transformation is the white man. And it seems like the other is only put in the film to make his transformation possible. Giles might be gay, but his sexuality is not in the focus of the story. And it does not threaten Eliza's and Amphibian Man's heterosexual normativity. So The Shape of Water is not a fuck you to the man. Instead, it's a glorious tribute. So we will ask ourselves this question. Did they live happily after in the heteronormative
Underwater world?
Underwater world.
Thank you.
Thank you.